Draft week finally here inside Black and Gold. Steve Geller, Jeff Nowak kicking things off, getting ready for the big day on Thursday. And man, oh man, Jeff, I've seen countless amounts of mock drafts, and I would say it's pretty safe to say everybody thinks the Saints are going offensive tackle in round one.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot. You know, we're finally getting to the point where we can say some new stuff. I'm looking forward to it. This week's going to be kind of interesting because we're going to have Mickey Loomis talking on Tuesday. I say interesting. He's not going to say anything. He never says anything during those press conferences. But hey, we're going to be there. We're going to ask him, and he's going to do his weird thing, and we're going to be like, okay, moving on. But
how much can I pay you to walk into the press conference and give Mickey a pack of gum when you get in there?
Oh God, if he's chewing gum again, man. I hope some like PR person was like, yeah, please never do that again.
Ever.
I don't care how sick you are. We'll figure it out. We'll reschedule the press conference. If you are too sick to not chew gum, we will reschedule the press conference and you can do another time. I have to believe that won't happen again. But
no, because that ended up being a national story and it was too funny.
Yeah, like Pat McAfee was talking about it.
Right.
Like that's nuts. But I hope we get the same energy level. Like, that was one thing from that press conference that like kind of got overshadowed by the gum chewing and weirdness. Was like that was a high energy Mickey, and I'd like to see high energy Mickey some more. You know, I'd like to see him kind of own that process a little bit more because this is a big draft. We need to talk about this. Like this is a big draft, so we're gonna go through. You know, this is gonna be our final mock draft episode. Yay, 4.0. So this is gonna be a short segment at the top, and then the second segment's gonna be Steve's. The final segment's gonna be mine. They're slightly different. We did both plan to trade up for a third round pick because I just think that's likely. Whether it's a third or a fourth round pick, or like, you know, in that comp range, it's likely they're going to trade up for one of these picks on day two, and we'll see whatever it is. But I just figured that would be a good way to kind of bridge that gap. Whereas like last time we traded up, and this time we're trading back, or at least you traded up, I traded back. But so we're going to do that. This first segment, I did want to go through the odds on the picks that we had intended to go through last episode and completely forgot on them. So it wouldn't surprise you that Olu Fashanu is the most popular pick for the Saints. He has the best odds at plus 200. He's the pick in about 33% of mocks here. Beyond that, Taliese Fuanga, Oregon State, who's at plus 250. And Amarius Mims, tackle out of Georgia at plus 400. That one surprises me because I don't think Amarius is really on the table at 14. So for them to pick Amarius Mims, you're probably trading back.
Right. We know Mickey don't do that.
He hasn't in a long time. But you know, I know Jeff Duncan wrote a column saying like, this is the time. It's time to do this. And I wouldn't hate it. I really wouldn't. That said, I really do like the tackle prospects that'll be there at 14. So I think it's a situation where if you're the Saints, you have, you know, you're going to like one or two of these guys a lot more than the others. And we as a media corps don't really know who that is because those are such like lock and key information, but you do know that that's the case, right? And I think what you're doing is you're looking at it and you're saying, if one of these two guys gets to us, we're taking him. Otherwise, we want to have something in play that we could potentially move back. That's how I would approach it. And I hope that's how they're approaching it, because you don't want to take a guy that you don't necessarily have a high grade on just because he is the highest rated tackle on the board, right? If you think you can get really good value in a trade, I do think they should entertain it. That said, it's hard for me to pass on these tackles.
No, since it's such an immense need with a guy that you're worried about not developing and hasn't gone the way things you would have liked with a Trevor Penning. And then the big questions with Ryan Ramczyk, where obviously you know the talent's there, but is the guy's knee going to hold up? And it's just time to get some young prospects in there to develop. And there's a new O-line coach in town too, so we'll see how that all works out.
Right. And so the next three on the list: Byron Murphy, defensive tackle out of Texas; Troy Fatanu, guard out of Washington. That's plus 600 and plus 650. And then Johnny Newton, defensive tackle out of Illinois; Jerzon Newton is full name, but I appreciate that he makes it easier for us and goes by Johnny. Plus 750 on this board. So that's pretty much, those are the most common picks. And then the field is plus 900. So if you want to bet the field, and these are from bookies.com. If you want to bet the field, it's funny because you're saying the field, but so who are you actually banking on, right? So you're betting that maybe they draft Michael Penix at 14. Maybe Brock Bowers gets there and they draft him. Maybe Dallas Turner drops and they take him. Maybe they trade back. Maybe they trade up for a guy like Joe Alt if Joe Alt falls somehow. But I do think that the field at plus 900, the odds are nice. If you're just trying to get a free odds bet, throw 10 to win 90. That's not terrible. But there's a reason that the odds are plus 900 on the field, because if they stick at 14, it just feels very likely that it's one of those tackles.
No, and if you're going by when we talked to Justin Mello, I think it was him that really kind of didn't have the highest gradings for a guy like Byron Murphy. And I think he felt he was more of a second round guy than a first rounder. So definitely not that 14 range, I think he said.
Defensive tackle is tough because I do like first round defensive tackles. Like, I think that they can be impact players in a way that, that's not always the case with some other positions, right? Like, you can get away with the positional value there more because those big bodies are so tough to find. But top 15 defensive tackles, you really need to be an impact player. Like, you need to have like Aaron Donald type projections to be a top 15 defensive tackle for me. And I don't know if they're here, right? Like, there's a lot of really intriguing defensive tackle prospects. I just don't know if they're top 15 defensive tackle prospects, but we'll see. In another year, I would probably be a lot heavier on that option than I am this year. And I try not, it's funny. I think we are falling into a trap like we tend to do every year of like, okay, this is a need, so that's what they're going to do. But, the Saints have shown that they're not always going to go that route. And historical reference has shown that you shouldn't always go that route. You shouldn't draft for need just because you have a need. It has to match the value. This year, it seems like it does. But at the end of the day, if the Saints get to 14 and they have a really high grade on someone that is not one of these offensive tackles, like an exceptionally high grade, a tier above everybody else on the board, then they're going to make that pick, right? And people are going to go nuts because they're like, why didn't you take this guy, this guy, this guy? And you can argue like, hey, the scouting has not been good enough, right? The scouting is a problem. But if you have to trust your scouting. If you've committed to the scouting that you have to trust that scouting, because otherwise, fire the scouts, right?
It's almost like they've done better in the later rounds than the early round projections.
I would say they have, and like you talk about, okay, why would they trade up for a third rounder, for a fourth rounder? Because the hit rate on those picks has been very good,
right? Compared
to fifth round. Like, I would much rather have 1 third rounder than 3 fifth rounders personally, especially with how the Saints have evaluated those picks historically, because you have a pretty wild list. You could argue that the list of third rounders is almost as impressive as the list of second rounders that the Saints have made over the last 15 years, because you have some really good second rounders in there, right? Like, you got Mike Thomas in there, you've got a handful of others. But like the third round list, you're talking about, Alvin Kamara, Jimmy Graham, like top end guys at those positions, Trey Hendrickson.
So we should trade out of the first and accumulate more third rounders.
Teron Armstead. I honestly, I'm not, like, you're joking, but at the same time, like, no, that's one of the things that it annoys me, that because they don't trade back. Because if you trade back in the first round, you can accumulate those day 2 picks and go into a draft with a couple second rounders, a couple third rounders, so that there's not so much pressure on that first rounder. But when you trade up into the first round, you better hit. That's why the misses feel like they're so impactful, because not only did you miss, you spent an extra first round pick to go get Marcus Davenport, right? You traded for that. You gave up extra value to get that extra pick that you spent on Trevor Penning. Now you gave up extra value to go get Chris Olave, but Chris Olave's delivered on that value. So you're like, okay, fine. But even then, has he delivered enough on that? Does he have to take another step still to justify what you gave up to go get him? I would argue he does. I think that's going to happen this year, but I would argue that over these first 2 years, you're getting a wash in terms of what you spent versus what you got back, because he's only been really good. He hasn't been next level good. He's not a Pro Bowler.
Right. And you're the 11th pick of the draft. So I agree with you. He has been really good, but I'm waiting for that next rocket up the ladder of wide receiver tier.
He's been what you have to be to make that pick reasonable, to justify that pick and that trade. But that's only the first 2 years, right? Now you're talking about, okay, his development should have gotten him to a point that he can be a star wide receiver because you've invested star wide receiver assets into him. And I think he can, to be fair. Like, this isn't me trashing on Chris Olave, but it's like, that's what the expectations are. Whereas when you take a guy in the second or third round, you can give that guy time to develop over a year or two. Teron Armstead wasn't great right away. It took him time. But you don't have that luxury with Trevor Penning. Like, we're not talking about Trevor Penning the same way we were talking about Teron Armstead in his second year after struggling as a rookie. And remember, yes, I get it. Trevor Penning is going to year 3, but last year was basically his rookie season. So that's why the team is talking about him like, yeah, he struggled as a rookie because he really didn't have a rookie season with the injuries. So those rookie struggles were second year struggles. And I know that's difficult to kind of to kind of allow those breaks to still exist because there's so much pressure on those first round picks. But that's realistically where he is. And so we'll see. Again, I would love it if they would trade back. I don't see it happening. I would love it. But we'll find out.
No, and we might hear it from Mickey again. Usually with their mentality with the Saints is they have a guy in mind that's their target, and then they'll aggressively go after him if they're worried that he is going to drop out of their range.
Yeah, the way they look at it is trading up is to go get the guy you believe is the elite option on the board, and trading back would be accepting a lesser player.
Right. Totally.
And with that logic, it makes a lot more sense why they never trade back, because they view it as saying, well, we could get a player of this value, of this talent level, or we could get a player of a lesser talent level, you know? I don't know if that's necessarily even true.
It's unfortunate for the Saints. Obviously, they've had too many swings and misses in those instances. But, you know, like we've mentioned, we need a draft like the old Marshawn Lattimore, Alvin Kamara year, because there's too many holes on this roster that could use some young talent to fill those gaps for this team. That's obviously, too, we've talked about nonstop. There are issues with the salary cap, but being able to manage it their own way.
Right. That logic only makes sense if you actually get that player of a higher talent level. If you don't, then it's like, well, now you're just wasting opportunities. But all right, that's the end of that segment. We've done it. You're talking about getting one of those 2017 drafts. Well, we're going to take our shot at what that might look at. Going to come back with Steve Geller's mock draft in the second segment. We're going to do mine. I went all 7 rounds. Steve went 3 rounds because Steve is just, not as committed to the process.
Definitely lazy. I'm like, I got my 3. I'm out.
No, I just figured I could be a little different because I just don't want to go through 2 of the same mock drafts. So we'll get through it. This is Inside Black and Gold. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Leave a rating, leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. We will be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. This is Mock Draft 4.0, the final one.
The final countdown.
And so Steve's going to be a 3-round mock with a trade to get a 3rd-round pick. So just to get 3 picks on the table, because we can at least talk about some guys we haven't talked about previously. So let's do that. I'm going to share my screen. Give me a second.
Yeah, I like I said to you when we first got on this off cam, the one annoying, aggravating thing dealing with these mock simulations.
That's weird.
In particular here with PFF, the descents of Jaden Daniels on this particular mock draft to me is ludicrous considering where you see he ends up.
Yes, I agree with you. And so, yeah, you whatever, I don't know, maybe you set your PFF settings here a little weird. Do you just do the standard ones?
Yeah, the only thing I adjusted was the speed of the draft, because I didn't want it whipping by me.
Just seems like for whatever reason, whenever you do your mocks, you get some off the wall picks. But you know, I think a lot of times we kind of fall into the trap of assuming that the way that the mock draft board is set is kind of is actually like how it's going to go, and a lot of times it's not. Like, I do think the Patriots are a bit of a wild card at number 3. Most likely they pick a quarterback, but hey, what if they don't? And it would throw everything a little into flux. And so we can go through it again. Pro Football Focus Simulator is what we used. So anything that's not a Saints pick, you can blame them. Like, we don't make those decisions. We just go on the board. And a lot of times I like it when the board is a little weird, because it forces you to kind of think about what would happen. That's the idea, right? That's the whole point of doing these, is so you can say, well, this happened, so what do we do?
Right.
And so let's just go through the first few picks. Number 1, Caleb Williams to the Bears. Obviously, Drake May, number 2 to the Commanders. Then that's where it gets weird. Not only does Jaden Daniels or JJ McCarthy not go number 3, you don't see them for a good bit. And,
even with number 6, the Giants going corner, I was like, what is going on here?
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. And it's like, okay, maybe they figured out no one went to his birthday party, right? Maybe that's what happened. It's that draft day reference that everyone, I don't know. Do people like that movie? I think it's dumb.
I think it's, I'm not a big fan. I kind of laugh at everything with it. And it's maybe a bad movie that can be laughable and funny to watch, but not anything that I'm tuning into. If it pops on one of the channels, I might leave it on, kind of thing.
Well, so the funniest part of that movie to me, and this is obviously an aside, but like the whole premise of, so Kevin Costner is the Browns GM,
right?
And he's talking to the Seahawks general manager. And the Seahawks general manager is like talking all this shit, and he's like super cocky and arrogant. And it's like, you're picking number 1 in the draft. You were the worst team in the NFL last year. Why are you like this? You should be worried for your job. What is this? Like, why are we acting like the movie sets it up as if the Seahawks general manager is like the seasoned pro who everyone respects? Like, you're picking first overall. Your team was terrible. Maybe they're in the situation the Bears are in. I don't know. Either way. So pick number 3, Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver out of Ohio State. I would be stunned if the Patriots went wide receiver here. I think if you don't go quarterback, if you're the Patriots, you'd trade. Now, This is not a mock where the computer teams are going to trade with each other. So maybe that's kind of what it's signaling, is they don't want the quarterback in their trade. Because I just think, like, if you're the Giants, right, or somebody that's quarterback needy, and the Patriots are signaling that we're not going to go quarterback at number 3, that's just a signal that you want to get in there. But either way, let's get so we can talk about the Saints pick a little bit more. Let's kind of run through these. Malik Neighbors, number 4 to the Cardinals. Joe Alt, tackle at Notre Dame, number 5 to the Chargers. And like you said, you're still not getting a quarterback.
You would think even Atlanta. I would thought Atlanta would have grabbed Jaden even.
Yeah, right. It's just it's nonsensical that this has happened the way it has. Rome Odunze, number 7 to the Titans. Then Falcons, like you mentioned, Latu Latu at number 8. Johnny Newton, number 9 to the Bears. So the Bears have gotten the quarterback and the defensive tackle. Number 10, again, you're looking at, this is a team that's quarterback needy. Why aren't they going, like, Aaron Rodgers is great. Yeah, sure. But how many years are you going to get out of him? 1, probably, maybe 2. So Jets are going Quinyon Mitchell, though. Quarterback out of Toledo. Vikings.
And another QB needy team.
Yeah. Vikings take Taliesin Fuanga at number 11. If Jaden Daniels got here, there's absolutely no way. It's like PFF is like conspiring with the Broncos.
Right?
It's like PFF was like, the Broncos really need a guy, and we're really
going to help him out.
Jaden, because this is where he goes, number 12 to Broncos, Sean Payton gets his quarterback. If this is what happened, Broncos fans would be ecstatic for good reason.
And I guarantee you'd see Sean with a big old grin too.
Yeah, right. And so number 13, Brock Bowers. So that takes that question off the table. We don't have to talk about that. But JJ McCarthy is on the board. So if the Saints really love JJ McCarthy, who again I don't think is a great option, but if they did, he's there. But that's not who you went with. Pick number 14. Who'd you get?
Ended up going the boring route with everybody was picking with Olu Fashanu. Taking him off the board. I was really tempted, but going with Dallas Turner in this spot. But I ended up going with, to me, the biggest need on the team still at offensive line. There were still, a few names on the board too. And I just want to shore up that position really well for this team. And I think Fashanu will come in right away, be a contributor. And I will see pretty soon. I'm not done either with offensive line.
Yeah, it's hard for me. So you look at Dallas Turner, right? That's sitting there, and man, that's a tough one to pass up. I don't know why he would fall this far. I'd be surprised if he was on the board when the Saints picked. But edge rusher is, as big of a need left tackle is. Edge rusher is right there. And if you have this is one of those situations where how high is your grade on Dallas Turner, right? Because if you have a top end first round grade, like a tier 1 grade on Dallas Turner, you're not passing on him just because you need a left tackle or a tackle. That's not how good teams draft. And I don't think it's how the Saints would draft. That said, if they could have a high grade on Olu and you're like, whatever, we're going to still go with this because it makes sense. I think
what really factored into me too, honestly, I thought about, all right, you're trying to get something out of Peyton Turner, still a young guy at the position that you have on the roster. Hopefully he can make some kind of jump this year. You did also sign a Chase Young in this spot too. So I definitely was swayed more towards the offensive tackle here.
You definitely have the numbers at edge rusher to feel a little more comfortable. I don't think you have the number. Like people are still saying, oh, move Trevor Penning to guard, right? I keep seeing people say that. And I get why you're saying that.
Easy, right?
Well, erase that part of it. Erase that part of the equation. Just look at the numbers, right? Just think okay, move Trevor Penning to guard, but then who are your tackles? Like at a certain point, you just need bodies at the position to develop. And so if you move Trevor Penning to guard, even if you your options are a hurt Ryan Ramczyk, Landon Young, Oli Udo, and then Olu Fashanu. That would be kind of funny if your left tackle depth chart was right. Oli and Olu. But yeah, I just at this point, you're keeping him at left tackle because you just need numbers at left tackle, right? So it's not like there's a really an incentive to do it. And I just don't think the Saints are going to even entertain that this year because they're going to want to keep him at his natural position, the one he's played at his whole career. I don't think you could go wrong with a tackle in this spot.
I was going to say a little interesting too right now. What's his name? Andrews Pete still hasn't been signed. Still a possibility to come back, although it kind of feels like the Saints might have, they might have it where they're ready to move on from him.
Well, it starts to make you wonder if there's something going on medically that has not been disclosed. Because he visited the Titans too, right? So, if he's having trouble passing a physical, a lot of times these guys play through injuries that you don't even know about. Like, look at Chase Young, right? Like, people knew he had a neck issue, but I don't think anyone knew he had to have surgery, or at least not publicly. And then, okay, well, this is an issue that someone's going to have to get past to sign a guy. And, so that could be happening. Either way, he's going to be an option for the Saints if they get to the end of this process and feel like they need another body. I also look at a guy like Trey Turner and say, okay, is he going to come back, at guard?
That's a great call there because that's a name, nobody's brought up at all. I know he's obviously up there in years, but it'll be interesting to see if, he has anything left to give to this team.
And from a health perspective, his injury sucks, but it did happen at an optimal time for him to be ready for this season. Right. Like Nephi Sewell, for instance, blew out his knee in week 17. That's brutal for multiple reasons. One, because it's a brutal injury and it's really difficult to come back from. But two, your timeline is really compressed to even get back for this season at all, let alone training camp. Like, he's not going to be ready for training camp. Whereas Trey, he's had all, basically a full year to rehab. So who knows? But either way, let's keep moving on. Troy Fautanu is another guy, 17 to the Jaguars, and J.C. Latham at number 18. I could see either of those guys being the pick for the Saints. The interesting thing is there's 4 tackles that you really look at. 2 of them are left tackles, 2 of them are right tackles, where Ola Fashanu and Troy Fautanu are left tackle prospects. Taliesin Fuanga, J.C. Latham are right tackle prospects. So if you feel like one of those is higher on your list than the other, and personally, right tackle's higher on my list, that could impact where you're going. All right. Next up, so J.J. McCarthy finally goes off the board. I say finally, but this is where, if you had told me this at the beginning of the draft process, I would have been like, wow, what a reach. Yeah. J.J. McCarthy goes off at number 19 to the Rams, then Terry and Arnold to the Steelers, cornerback at Alabama at 20, Jared Verse to the Dolphins at 21, Brian Thomas to the Eagles at 22. Michael Penix goes to the Vikings at 23. So they didn't want Jaden Daniels, but they come up here and they draft Michael Penix in the first round. So, hey, if they really liked Michael Penix, maybe that's the answer. Is they were like, well, we don't need to spend this high pick on Jaden Daniels or JJ McCarthy because the guy we want is going to be there at 23.
Yeah, just one of those, I guess you could look at it as, the Vikings got their man anyway in the end.
Right. So then you have Amarius Mims going off to the Cowboys at 24. This is why when I look at the odds and I see Amarius Mims on there, those odds to me indicate you're betting on a trade.
Right.
Because I think 14 would be way too high for Amarius Mims just because he's only played 8 games in college. Like, there's going to have to be development there at the base level. And you have a bunch of options at 14 that aren't as much of a project. So I don't know. Nate Wiggins to the Packers at 25, Jackson Powers Johnson, the first interior lineman, to the Bucks at 26. That would make sense considering the state of their offensive line. Adonai Mitchell, a wide receiver a lot of people like, goes to the Cardinals. So they have taken Malik Neighbors and Adonai Mitchell. So Kyler Murray gets his weapons. Troy Franklin out of Oregon goes to the Bills. Kool-Aid McKinstry, cornerback at Alabama, to the Lions. Lad McConkey. So a lot of wide receivers coming off. He goes to the Ravens at 30. Then Graham Barton out of Duke, the last offensive lineman of the first round. Adisa Isaac, edge rusher out of Penn State. Not a very popular name, but the Chiefs tend to do that. The Chiefs love to take kind of an off-the-wall guy with that 32nd overall pick. They did it with Clyde a couple years ago.
Yeah, and he hasn't really, done much in the NFL yet. Just kind of been ho-hum.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that has panned out to be a particularly good pick.
No.
But okay, so we'll go through 45. We'll go through the names up to 45, and then we'll kind of skip around. So Mike Sanderstill, Bo Nix, Peyton Wilson, Jordan Morgan, Tyler Nubin, first safety off the board. He goes to the Chargers at 37. Zach Frazier, a center, goes to the Titans at 38. Keon Coleman, a name that should be interesting for the Saints at 45, goes to the Panthers at 39. Then Chop Robinson, another guy that I think the Saints are going to be in on. Braden Fisk, who was your pick in the last mock draft. He's off the board, so he cannot be your pick now. Jalen Polk, wide receiver out of Washington, goes to the Texans at 42. Then this is a kind of a run on wide receivers right before the Saints get on the board. Ricky Pearsall out of Florida goes to the Falcons, and Roman Wilson, wide receiver out of Michigan, goes to the Raiders. And so who's your guy here?
Yeah, you mentioned that little run on wide receivers. So I was definitely thinking about good old Xavier Legette, who the Giants end up scooping up at 47. But with pick 45, I went right back to offensive tackle. I got the left side, and I figured, all right, let's shore up the right side now with a guy like Tyler Guyton, bring him in just for the amount of reasons we've talked about their issues and questions on that offensive line, just looking to bring some fresh new blood into that mix.
And that's great value. If Tyler Guyton's on the board at 45,
that was another one. I was like, damn, I can't pass him up.
He was my first round pick in the last mock. Because I traded back. I think I traded back to 24 with the Cowboys. So, I mean, I don't know why he'd be on the board at 45, but if he was and you have a high grade on him, yeah, this is a no-brainer pick. And yeah, I've said this a few times. I would not be stunned or upset in any way if they went tackle, because the depth, I mean, you've allowed it to get to the state that it is. There's no harm in just doing it in 1 year, and you will end up having a really young tackle room, and those guys are going to have to develop alongside each other. And maybe that's difficult. Maybe there's only so much coaching bandwidth that can happen in any particular season. But it does, but you can look at it two ways. One, there's, coaching might be spread a little thin, but you have two young guys who can kind of learn and build together. And then hopefully they are taking over your tackle spot in a year, and they're this really great tandem that can be there for however long, right? So I don't hate it.
Yeah, the availability of Guyton at the spot definitely made it a lot easier for me to pull off that tackle combo in this particular draft. I was also considering Bullard at safety, who also went a couple picks later to the Bengals.
Yeah, a couple interesting names that were still on the board. Leggett, obviously, I really like him. It would be tough for me to get, the value of Tyler Guyton is obviously high, right?
Yeah.
And I picked him in the first round of my last mock, so I'd be crazy to not take him here if he got there. That said, like Xavier Leggett is a guy that I would love at 45. As you mentioned, Javon Bullard, another safety. Mike Detillier went through his safety rankings. They're up on WWL.com, but so there's no first round safeties in this draft, but that doesn't mean there aren't good safeties in this draft. It's just, again, it's one of those positions that the value does not indicate you should reach for a guy in the first round, but there's some really quality safety options in the second and third round. Javon Bullard is one of those guys. Tyler Nubin is another one of those guys. So it definitely could be somewhere the Saints look. There's Jonah Ellis going off at 51. Caden
I was going to say,
brother.
too, for whatever reason, when I do these mocks, TJ Tampa's always seems to be a name that's around for me.
Yeah, he's tough. I have a hard time grading him. I just don't see the Saints drafting a corner unless it's a slot corner
right
option,
exactly.
And I don't think that he's a top end slot corner option, even though he has a catchy name that feels like he should be a slot corner. Keep going down here. Blake Corum, halfback out of Michigan. That's way too high for him. Jonathan Brooks out of Texas. So you see a quick little run on running backs there. Malachi Corley, interesting guy to Western Kentucky. Why don't you tell me what your trade is before we go any further?
My trade, I ended up packaging together the Saints' third round pick from next year, along with the 3 fifth-round selections and a 6th-rounder this year. So that's 3 5s, a 6, and next year's third for pick number 72 overall.
Okay, so you got a pretty high 3rd-rounder. So that's reasonable. But you gave up a lot because you gave up next year's 3rd-rounder.
I tried to pull it off, giving up a 4th. The PFF would not do it, and I wasn't going to be, the Madden video game and force the trade kind of thing.
Yeah, it's tough to justify if you're giving up that 3rd-rounder, but you are getting a top end 3rd-rounder, right? You're getting the 7th pick of the 3rd round. So even if the Saints are bad next year, they shouldn't be top 10 pick bad, right? And even if they are, you're really the only way you lose value there is, at least on the 3rd-rounder, is if the Saints end up being a top 7 draft pick, which even if they underperform and play badly, they should win 7 games. So that kind of takes you out of that range. So I don't hate the idea of doing that. And I do think this is a pretty deep draft through the 3rd and 4th round. I don't know if it's a deep draft through the 7th round, right? It's a deep class, but it doesn't get to day 3 feeling incredibly deep. So I think that their hit rate in the 3rd round is something that you should take advantage of. So let's see. Darius Robinson gets all the way to 66. It's kind of he was an early darling, and it feels like the interest level has kind of waned on him. I still think he's a top end talent. So I would be very surprised if he got here. But either way, he's off the board before you go. Marshawn Nealand is a guy who visited the Saints. He would be, if he was on there at 72, that would be interesting. Brandon Coleman, not the Brandon Coleman, but a Brandon Coleman, goes off 1 pick before the Saints. He's a tackle at a TCU. And then tell me about your guy, Ruke.
I looked at the big board and said, what is the most difficult name left that I could select to mess things up?
Did you look up how to say it?
Yeah, the R's are silent. I mean, the H's are silent. Sorry.
Ororo?
Yeah. Right. It sounds like you're like Astro from the Jetsons. Ororo.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. Ruke Ororo. Yeah, I mean, defensive tackle, it's one of those positions that you never go wrong. But yeah, you went with 3 tackles. You went with 2 offensive tackles and a defensive tackle.
Trench heavy this draft for sure. A guy that he grew up in Nigeria. We've seen Saints, taking guys that have been introduced to the game a little later in their life than maybe some of the others. Also have some history last year taking someone from the Clemson D-line that worked out pretty well. So Ruke is the latest, and I think can be, that run stuffer right away from you. Definitely needs some work on his pass rushing skills.
Yeah, that's true. He would have been teammates with Brian Brzee at Clemson, so there's some familiarity there. I have often kind of found myself going down the rabbit hole of like, how often do teams go back to the same well? And I do think it does happen because, it just kind of common sense would dictate that, hey, we spent all last offseason talking to his defensive line coaches and kind of getting that. There hasn't been a ton of turnover with Clemson. So all those coaches talk to him again. They're going to try to sell their guy, and you trust them because they gave you a good read on Brian Brzee last year. So why would you doubt them this time? So I think that's a decent little option there. Ruke Ororo. I can't wait to. I hope they make this pick just because I want to hear Bobby try to pronounce this name.
No Bobby this year.
No, I understand, but he will inevitably.
Eventually, I got you.
He will have to try to pronounce this name, and I think that would be hilarious.
When he gets back from Bo's wedding, we'll get him on definitely for a post-draft show.
We can't tell him how to say it. We just need to get him to tell us how you think this name is said.
Oh, he's just going to say, I'm just going to call him Ruke.
He's going to call him like ho, ho, ho. Yeah. And so a couple names that came off after Blake Fisher.
That's what happened for making fun of Bobby.
Javon Baker, wide receiver, goes to the Falcons. So they get a couple wide receivers here. Central Florida, fighting Traquan Smiths. Devontae Walker goes to the Broncos so they get Jaden Daniels and probably the fastest, maybe not the fastest, but a very fast wide receiver. Spencer Rattler to the Raiders. Johnny Wilson, a guy I picked in the last mock, goes to the Falcons. They got a lot of pass catchers. Jalix Hunt out of Houston Christian. That's a fun name. And Trey Benson's the last pick of the 3rd round. Oh no, he's not the last pick of the 3rd round, but he is 85th to the Browns. I think, running back is an interesting option for me. It's one that no one's really talking about.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a bigger need than a lot of people are giving it, just because you have bodies in there this year, but how far do you expect to go with Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams? Probably this would be his last year with the Saints if he makes the roster at all. So I don't think it would be unwise at all to stock up at the running back position in the mid rounds here.
No, and I think we've mentioned it. Obviously, I think both of us are on the same page where we still believe in a Kendry Miller, but I wouldn't be opposed to them adding more depth to that running back room either, just because we don't know, like you said, will AK be back? And then obviously with Jamal Williams, he's, 31, 32-year-old guy. Who knows what happens next season?
Yeah, and it's not about Kendra. It's about, you need more than one running back.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why you went out and drafted Kendra and signed Jamal. Like, it's you can believe in Kendra and still feel like you need to add young bodies in that running back room, because next year it's not out of the realm of possibility that the running back room is Kendra Miller and whoever you draft this year.
Yeah.
I still think Alvin is playing at a high enough level that you could see him coming back next year, but it's not a given. He's busy out at Talladega this weekend. But all right, let's wrap that up. This is
real quick. Number 94, Michael Pratt going to the Niners.
Yes, Mr. Pratt is off the board.
He's ready to learn from Brock Purdy now.
Yes, and let's remind everyone who Steve picked.
Dun, 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 dun. a name that everyone will look at and be like, how the heck am I supposed to say that?
Yeah, so it was Olu Fashanu at number 14. It was Tyler Guyton at number 30 or at number 45. And then it was Rook Arororo at number 72. Also, that was a trade. You gave up all 3 fifth rounders, number 190, and then next year's third to get number 72 to make that pick.
Pretty steep price.
And PFF liked it. So good for you.
Yeah, but we know just because PFF likes it don't mean it means crap.
Yeah, I mean, all it means is you took guys a couple picks prior to their value on the PFF.
And we mentioned this too, and obviously our breakdown, seeing Guyton fall, that seemed like, oh my God, I have to go tackle here.
Yeah, PFF forced you to make that pick. They're like, we'll give you an A+ if you make this pick. Do it.
Sold.
But all right, this is Inside Black and Gold. We'll be coming back. One more mock draft. It's mine. It's going to be 7 rounds, so we'll fly through it. Don't worry. This is Inside Black and Gold. Stick around. And we are back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. One more mock draft to go through, and it's mine. Again, it's going to be a 7-round mock. I traded into the 3rd round and then made a couple picks on the back end. I did forget to save my list of picks, so it's going to be kind of a mystery as we scroll through and try to remember which picks I traded for. I believe it was 95. I took a later trade into the 3rd round than you did, Steve, which is why I was able to give up a little bit less. Okay. I think I was able to make that trade with a 4th rounder instead of a 3rd rounder, which I would feel a lot better about. Gave away 2 of the 5th rounders and I think the 6th rounder, but I was able to make a couple picks on the back end. So there'll be some later round options, but let's just dive right into it. This one goes a little bit more like we expect. You get the 3 quarterbacks at the top: Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, 1, 2, 3. Marvin Harrison goes number 4 to the Cardinals, and Malik Neighbors number 5 to the Chargers. Then JJ McCarthy number 6 to the Giants. So these are all your mock went crazy. Mine is right on line with what we expect, and that's probably why it's going to be wrong. But we'll continue down here. Again, this is kind of the normal equation, right?
How are Giants fans going to feel going from Daniel Jones to JJ McCarthy?
They're going to be mad about it. Dallas Turner goes to the Titans at number 7. Brock Bowers to the Falcons at number 8. Rome Odunze to the Bears at number 9. Right, so that's kind of the accepted. It might not be the order. I think a lot of people might say Odunze goes a little higher, but I think that's going to be pretty close to what happens now. Your guy, Olu Fashanu, comes off the board for me at number 10. So he's not on my list. So I don't have to worry about making the popular pick. Terry and Arnold goes.
Sean Payton smiling in your mock draft, too.
Yes. Terry and Arnold comes off at number 11 to the Vikings. Then Joe Alt falls all the way to 12. I think, personally, if Joe Alt gets to 11, you are moving heaven and earth to make that trade with the Vikings, assuming the Vikings aren't making that pick, right? If the Vikings are looking at this and saying, we want Terry and Arnold, we want a cornerback, then trade down, because Quinyon Mitchell's still on the board, right? So you could trade down to number 14, assuming that both of those guys aren't coming off, and pick up whatever value you need, because you're not taking the obvious guy anyway. There's a very obvious pick that people are going to be dying to get their hands on, and the Vikings would be crazy. Olu Fashanu comes off, right? Olu Fashanu comes off to 10 to the Jets. They wouldn't make that trade because they want to tackle anyway, and they don't. And if they really love, this would mean that they love Olu Fashanu so much that they're going to bypass Joe Alt to take him. So they're not going to trade down because they must have a really high grade on Olu. But the Vikings clearly, they would be crazy to sit in this spot. But either way, Joe Alt goes to the Broncos in this mock at number 12. Again, Sean Payton is having a very good day in both of our mocks, because he got Jaden Daniels in yours and gets Joe Alt in mine. Next, that's the guy we talked about, Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. You could make an argument that he is the top cornerback on the board. I would make that argument over Terry and Arnold, but we'll go on. And then so I'm going to go back to my guy. He was my pick in the first 2 mocks. For whatever reason, he's always on the board when I pick, and he's never on the board when you pick. But Taliesin Fuanga, number 14 overall, he's just going to be that guy that you know, if Ryan Ramczyk can play, he'll back up Ryan Ramczyk to start the year. And if Ryan Ramczyk can't play, he'll start in week 1. I expect him to take over at some point in his rookie season, assuming Ryan gets hurt or can't finish it out. And if not, then he's a guy who will be primed as your starting right tackle for the next 3 years. However long you get out of Ryan is you're stealing at this point. So that's a no-brainer pick to me, and I'm happy about it. And yeah.
No, it's in obviously that range and that the number of tackles that we've talked about. You got like a little run going on right here.
Yeah, and so in this mock, Graham Barton goes way higher. He goes number 15 overall to the Colts. Troy Fatanu goes to the Seahawks at 16. Then Byron Murphy to the Jaguars to break up the tackles at 17. Then J.C. Latham to the Bengals. So again, these are all the, other than Graham Barton, these are the common names that you've seen for the Saints, and they all kind of go in that range. So I don't think you'd go wrong with basically any of them. It's just about taking the guy that you think fits best. And to me, that road grading right tackle just is what you need. Like, we talk about the pass protection, and yes, that's important. But one of the other issues this team has had is they can't run the ball. And protecting the passer becomes a lot easier to do when you can run the ball, right? So I think that's almost as important to me as getting that kind of plug and play pass protector, is getting a guy who can help unlock the run game for some of these guys. And don't take that as saying Taliesin is not a good pass protector. I think he's just got a little more work to do in that part of his game than maybe Olu does. But Olu's not the run blocker that this guy is. So, you kind of take what you can. But yeah, I feel good about that pick. It's been the only mock that it wasn't my pick in. And that's, again, it's helpful that the board goes the way that I need it to, was the last mock. And that was just because I traded down.
Right. There you go. Exactly.
So this has been my guy from day one. It's still my guy. If he's on the board at 14, I think he's going to be the pick.
Interested seeing here. I think my mock also had the Rams taking Bo Nix.
I think yours had him taking J.J. McCarthy.
Oh, that was it. That's right. He fell that far. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so J.J.'s off the board now. But yeah, the Rams taking a quarterback makes sense, just because, obviously Matt Stafford is still playing at a high level, but he's getting up there, right? They would be wise to plan for the future at the quarterback position. But yeah, so Bo Nix, 19 of the Rams, Brian Thomas Jr. to the Steelers at number 20. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be one of these guys we talk about in a couple of years, like Justin Jefferson. And we look back and we're like, how did he get all the way to 20? I genuinely think that's going to be the case, because he's just got so much talent, and I feel like he's just scratching the surface. Like, he's got the size, he's got the speed, he can make contested catches. He's just a touchdown machine. I genuinely think that he's going to be that guy from this draft, that we're going to redo this mock, or we're going to, they do like the re-ranking of like, okay, if we picked again today, where would these guys go? I think he's going to be a guy that ends up getting picked in like the top 8. And one of these wide receivers that we're universally saying is a top 10 pick is going to be a bust.
No, I'd be curious if it wasn't such a chock full draft and these offensive tackles, would Thomas be viewed as a much higher pick? Because I agree with you. You look at where he's slated to go in this draft, and nobody really has him in the top 15, I would even think.
No, but that doesn't mean he won't get picked in the top 15, right? It just takes one team to fall in love with a guy, and then he goes a lot higher than, and that's going to be a theme that we talk about. But all right. So keeping going on, Jared Verse, number 21 to the Dolphins, Chop Robinson to the Eagles at 22, Nate Wiggins, cornerback out of Clemson, to the Vikings at 23, Cooper DeJean to the Cowboys at 24. So this is a guy who went number 6 in your mock to the Giants. And in this mock, he's going number 24 to the Cowboys. So that just tells you there's a lot of volatility in his draft stock that is tough to gauge. Latu Latu, Packers at 25, Marius Mims to the Bucks at 26. And so if you had to pick 26 and get an offensive lineman, this is probably a good year for you. Like, a lot of times you're not going to get a top end option at 26. But the Bucks are sitting there landing these guys, either the top interior lineman or, a really high level prospect at tackle and Amarius Mims. Tyler Guyton's still not off the board. So someone at PFF has been sitting there like trashing Tyler for some reason.
It seems like that, right?
All right, keeping going. Xavier Worthy, Cardinals, and Adonai Mitchell to the Bills. So both Texas wide receivers go back to back here at number 27 and 28. Darius Robinson is going 29 here. So your mock was all over the place. I do wonder if maybe you messed with one of these sliders and didn't realize it.
Like I said, the only one I knowingly did was just the speed of the draft.
Yeah, because like Darius Robinson goes 29 here. He went like 62 in yours.
Pretty wild for sure.
Kool-Aid McKinstry, the last 3 picks. Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama goes to the Ravens at 30. Jackson Powers Johnson to the 49ers at 31. And then Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle out of Arizona, goes to the Chiefs at 32. Going down here, again, I didn't make any trades in the second round, so we can just go up to 45. Johnny Newton falls all the way to 33. Then Tyler Guyton, your guy, goes at 34 to the Patriots. Xavier Legette to the Cardinals at 35. Patrick Paul out of Houston. Another fringe first-round tackle that no one really talks about goes to the Commanders at 36. Ladd McConkey, Ennis Rakestraw Jr., Jalen Polk, Peyton Wilson, Zach Frazier, Mike Sanderstill, who was my pick in the first mock at 45, and I got an F for it, goes to the Texans at 42. Kingsley Sumataya goes to the Falcons at 43. Then Michael Penix Jr. So if you were a Michael Penix Jr. stan and you really wanted him on the Saints, he's off the board right before the Saints pick at 45. I don't think he would have been the pick at 45. If he was there, I wouldn't have taken him. But he's not an option. So who is it? Keon Coleman.
Come on down.
45. Wide receiver out of Florida State, Louisiana guy. He's visited the Saints. He's that big-bodied receiver. He reminds you of Mike Thomas from a play style perspective. He's not a guy who relies on separation to make catches. That can be a gift and a curse because you got to be able to make those contested catches, those battle catches. I think he can. So he's a guy. I think I went Xavier Legette in the last mock. This time I go Keon Coleman. If either of those guys ended up on the Saints, I would be happy about it. This time Keon's the guy who fell, so Keon's the guy I took. There's a lot of other wide receiver options you could go with. This would not be the end of the world if you didn't take either of those guys and still got a wide receiver. But this makes sense to me, and I think that would be a really good first 2 rounds for me personally if I ended up with Fuanga and Keon Coleman at 14 and 45.
No, we've talked about obviously the wide receiver position a bunch too. And for me, if you could get a Keon Coleman or an Xavier Legette and pair them up with, Rashid Shaheed, obviously, and, Chris Olave, I think that's a nice trio for the black and gold.
I agree. So going forward, remember I traded for a 3rd round pick. I traded for a later one. I think it was 95. I traded with the Chiefs. And it makes sense because the Chiefs are a team that, they live in the late rounds. Because they have to, because they pay Pat Mahomes so much. You got to fill out the roster some way. And, and they make hay on these later round picks because Pat Mahomes can turn these guys into, at least these offensive guys, into star players, right? That's the value of having one of those quarterbacks is you don't have to give them first round wide receivers. You can give them, Mecole Hardman or, he might have been 2nd rounder. I can't remember. Like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and he's going to go win a Super Bowl with them. So anyway, yeah, we're going to keep going. I won't go through all these names, but yeah, Ricky Pearsall comes off, Tyler Nubin, first safety, Roman Wilson at 54 to the Browns, Jonathan Brooks, 55 to the Dolphins, Braden Fisk, who was both of our picks last time. Oh, yeah, no, I didn't take Xavier Legette last time. I took Braden Fisk. I think I took Xavier Legette in a previous mock, but
for sure,
either way, he's a guy, he's still on the board. But I like Keon, and I went with Keon this time. I changed my mind. Jatavian Sanders, probably the only day 2 tight end, or at least day 2, like good value day 2 tight end.
Right.
We're going to keep going. So we're into the 3rd round. Marshawn Nealon's a guy that I would have been interested in if he got all the way to 95. He didn't. He goes off at 65 to the Panthers. Christian Haynes, another interesting name, goes to the Commanders at 67. Brandon Coleman goes to the Giants. Tackle out of TCU. Here's your guy, Ruke Orororo.
I think that's who I traded with too, the Jets. So that's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's a good value pick for you. Blake Fisher, Javon Bullard, Jalen Wright. Keep going down. Jalen McMillan out of Washington goes to the Colts at 82. Then Trey Benson out of Florida State. He's a guy I would have looked at. I really like that Florida State offense. I don't know why I keep going back to it. Spencer Rattler goes to the Browns. You know, you kind of get to these middle tier quarterbacks. You're talking about Michael Pratt, Spencer Rattler, guys the Saints might really like, and this would be an area they could go target them. So if they're trading up into the third round, it could be for one of these quarterbacks if they really do like them. Johnny Wilson's a guy I took in the third round of the last mock. Wide receiver out of Florida State, probably ends up being a tight end. But, okay, we're getting close here. And 95, Saints trade up with the Chiefs. Dun, 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 dun. And we are getting Mason Smith, defensive tackle out of LSU. We talked about this on the last pod. He has visited the Saints, and we expect him to go a lot higher than the board might think. This was high for him in the PFF big board. I knew I could get him at 95 because I knew PFF had him rated really low. I don't think that's reality. I think PFF is undervaluing him. And, 45 is probably too rich. I don't think you could justify it at 45. Maybe, but that would be a reach, in my opinion. That said, if I can trade him at 95 and get him there, I think that's a steal because this is a guy, if you could draft guys out of high school, off the hype you're getting out of a high school player, he would have been a first round pick. He didn't deliver at LSU, but it wasn't really about talent level, right? It was about that defense just sucked this past year. It's tough to be a defensive tackle when the secondary can't cover, right? And he's coming off that nasty injury in week 1, 2 years ago. So he's healthy now. And you're just kind of going back to those elite traits. Did he get the amount of development you hoped he would at the college level? No, but that's why he's available at number 95. And when you're drafting at number 95, you're not going to get a perfect prospect, but you are looking for elite traits and you're working for a top end work ethic. And I think you got that there. So I feel good about Mason Smith at number 95.
I know Mike Detillier is going to love your pick. That's his guy.
He's real good. Like, I feel like people have forgotten just how top end this dude is from a talent, physicality perspective. Another interesting one. So this was the last pick before the comp picks. And if you recall, you weren't on the episode, but I went through all of the visits that we knew about for the Saints. And Christian Mahogany was one of them, a guard out of Boston College. So this is an area where there's a couple visits on the board that if this is a guy that you've gotten a really good look at and you really like, that could be the trade. If you trade to 95, it could be to go draft Christian Mahogany because that's kind of where his value is at in the mock drafts. But either way, like Cade Stover is another interesting option, tight end out of Ohio State. I think tight end should be a target for the Saints in this draft somewhere. And but yeah, I feel really good about it. So far, my picks: Taliesin Fuanga at 14, Keon Coleman at 45, and Mason Smith at 95.
No, the Mason Smith pick is definitely an eye opener, and I know obviously LSU fans will be loving that for the black and gold if they were to draft him. I can't remember the last player. Was it Will Clapp that the Saints LSU player that the Saints?
He was the last LSU draft pick. They've obviously signed several LSU players: right. Tyrann Mathieu, Jarvis Landry, Foster Moreau, but they have not drafted them. So this would be a kind of a
break the mold
step away from that, right?
Yeah.
So I don't have a 4th round pick. So we'll just kind of fly through this. Ben Sinnott, tight end off the board. He's a guy I really liked.
Cameron Jeremiah Trotter Jr., the linebacker, too. He was someone I was considering the 3rd, and I saw he went early in the 4th.
Yeah, he went 102 overall. So he was the 2nd pick of the 4th round. Linebacker out of Clemson. He went to the Seahawks. Cameron Kinchins is an interesting one. I think safety is a position you could target with some of your 5th round picks. Obviously, I traded away a lot of these later round picks, so I don't have them. But he went to the Eagles at 120. Michael Pratt goes to the Broncos at 121.
Sean Payton strikes again.
Sean Payton comes back to New Orleans to get his quarterback. And he's going to have Michael Pratt and Joe Alt to control Alt Delete. All right.
Saints fans won't be mad at all.
T'Vondre Sweat goes off at 126. He's another guy that I think defensive tackle is, you're going to get a defensive tackle somewhere. So whether it's Mason Smith, T'Vondre Sweat, one of these guys, one of these top end athletes, I expect them to go after. Mekhi Wingo goes at 128 to the Bills, another LSU guy that no one's really talking about. Okay, we are into the 5th round. Theo Johnson goes off the board. He's a sexy name for the Saints. So you're kind of losing those options at the tight end position if that was a position you wanted to target. Mo Kamara goes to the Panthers at number 141. So we will have some Kamara on Kamara violence, most likely at some point this season, if this is the case. Cornelius
What's going to happen when someone says Kamara and then the other one says Kamara, and
I don't know. It's tough. Jaquan Jackson, Tulane wide receiver, goes off at 147. Yeah. He's an interesting guy to me. And so we're getting to my pick at 150. This is the one I didn't trade, the 5th round pick I didn't trade. And I went with Dylan Lobey out of New Hampshire because if I'm going to talk about the guy so much, I might as well put my money where my mouth is and draft the guy. And I think it'd be a good pick. I think, 5th round, this might be a little early for him, but remember, I traded away those other 2 5th round picks. So I am waiting a good bit to get to my next pick. And this just makes sense to me. I like this pick. I like the depth that you're adding in that running back room. Kendre Miller is not the scat back guy, even though he can catch. I think he is more of your between the tackles runner. And this could be a good combo if you can find a way to keep Dylan around. Maybe he ends up on the practice squad this year and then you bring him back at some point. But yeah, I like this pick. I think running back is a position the Saints will target. And again, this is a guy they got a really good look at. He was at the Senior Bowl. He looked really good at the Senior Bowl. They had him in for a visit. So I think this is what I'm happy about.
Check off the standard was at the Senior Bowl on the, interview box. Agreed.
All right, we're going to keep going. Luke McCaffrey, wide receiver out of Rice. He's a guy I considered. I like Luke. I don't know. I don't think that you're that desperate for a wide receiver that you're going to, just start throwing darts at the position. But hey, Jaheim Bell out of Florida State, tight end, another tight end off the board. We're going to keep going. I genuinely cannot remember what my next pick is, so I'm just going to scroll down. We're into the 6th round. Again, like I said, I traded those other 2 third rounders, or those other 2 5th rounders, those 2 5th round comps. So we are into the 6th round for our next pick. And that pick, so you got Jordan Travis going off at 187 to the Falcons. That's interesting to me. I think that the Falcons should be considering some young quarterbacks they could develop behind Kirk Cousins. But yeah, so you're kind of into these a lot of names that you probably don't know. But I'm going with another guy that I know they had a visit with, and that's Christian Boyd, defensive tackle. Right. So, I think there is one of these tackles, one of Mason Smith and Christian Boyd, you would expect to develop into that rotational defensive tackle this season, right? And that's kind of the Malcolm Roach position that you really didn't have anyone at. PJ Mustipher was in the mix later in the season. So there's space for that. And so I think defensive tackle is one that I don't know if you can ever have too many bodies at. These guys get hurt. They're constantly in the muck getting rolled up on. So I think Christian Boyd would make a lot of sense. A guy they got a good look at. Guy Northern Iowa, again, I think going back to familiar wells for talent is something that happens. And Saints have had a couple Northern Iowa players. So yeah, that's my pick at 190.
And yeah, we've talked about obviously that need on that line is just a notch below the offensive line to me, obviously, because we saw issues last season, maybe not as much getting to the quarterback, but man, oh man, stopping the run was a huge issue.
Agreed. Yeah, I just think no one gets excited when they draft a defensive tackle at 190 overall. But I do think that that's kind of where you can find some, the wide receivers, the running backs, they're going to flash. It's hard to find a value on them in the late rounds. The defensive tackles who kind of just get lost in the dust. I think you can nab a couple of those. I think that's who Christian Boyd could be. And again, it's just a guy who probably is a developmental player. You throw him on the practice squad, give him some time. Problem is, it's tough to keep all these guys around. That's why I just don't see, how many picks can you make, right?
Right.
If the Saints trade back, I think you're trading back obviously for value, but not necessarily this year's value, right? Well, one thing that's annoyed me over the last several years is you want to be aggressive and trade up, but it's a lot easier to be aggressive and trade up when you kind of have cycled it so that the year before you weren't aggressive and you accumulated assets so that when you do want to be aggressive, you have extra picks to work with.
Yeah,
right?
that ammo.
When you're trading up, when you're at a deficit already and then you trade up, it's like, Jesus, now we just have nothing. You're pick poor already, and now you're even more pick poor. But all right. And then the final pick, we don't need to go through all these names, but we're in round 7. I want to say it's 239. It is. And so we end up with Brevin Spanford. Like I said, I wanted to target tight end somewhere. And, when you get to these late picks of these UDFAs, it's funny. So why do you pick a guy in the 7th round? Like, what draws you to a guy in the 7th round? Well, in a lot of cases, it's going to be, okay, this is a guy that we wanted as a UDFA, but it's competitive and we don't want to have to compete with anyone, and we're just going to take him, right? That's what happened with Tommy Myers. Remember Tommy Myers? So he was a quarterback. They wanted to convert him to tight end. He wanted to go to the Panthers. He was going to sign to the Panthers as a UDFA. So what do the Saints do? They trade into the 7th round and say, no, you're coming here. We're not going to let you go to the Panthers. We're going to draft you. Now, what ended up happening? He went to the Panthers. He ended up on the Panthers, and he didn't really do anything in the NFL. But that's like, when you're talking about a 7th round pick, a lot of the time it's just who's the most competitive UDFA on your board, and how badly do you want him? Because that's kind of where you are. The other thing that Mickey Loomis will say, and most general managers would say, is when you get into the UDFA kind of area or the 7th round area, you're not necessarily looking for a perfect prospect because they don't exist. You are looking for elite traits. You are looking for 1 or 2 elite traits, and a tight end that's 6'7" and can run a 4.7 40. I would say that's elite athleticism at the tight end position.
I was going to say, your boy's got the size. I was looking up his stats.
Yeah. Now, the problem with Brevin is he's a 6'7" tight end that doesn't block well. and that's a problem, obviously. But I do think that, when you have the traits necessary, I can teach you how to be a better blocker, right? He's a big tight end that blocks like a little tight end. I need him to be a big tight end that blocks like a big tight end. And I'm betting that I can develop that part of his game because he's got all the tools to do it. And again, you're talking about a 7th round pick. If you're drafting a 7th round pick that you don't feel like needs development to succeed at the NFL level, then you're not, because this is make-believe, because there's no such thing as a 7th round pick that doesn't need to develop. They're in the 7th round. Like, that's why. And so, yeah, I think one of the things you look at the roster, okay, what don't they have? What don't the Saints have? They don't have a big blocking tight end. Foster Moreau is kind of a dirty work guy, but I don't think that that's necessarily, he's kind of a tweener at the tight end position because he's not a pass catcher, but he's also not a big guy who can be an extra offensive lineman, right? Basically that jumbo offensive lineman. That's not what he is. Juwan Johnson, that's definitely not what he is. He's more of a move tight end. So I think he would make a lot of sense, or tight end at all would make a lot of sense. And whether it's the 5th, 6th, 7th round, whether it's Cade Stover, right, Eric All, one of these guys, I think you're going to see the Saints add a tight end because this is, they haven't done it in a while, and then it's about time.
Yeah, and you're not going to have likely, Jimmy Graham back. He seemed to say his goodbyes on Instagram, not in so many words, but basically was, it was fun, New Orleans. Thanks for everything.
Jimmy Graham is currently training to row across the Arctic.
Right, that too, exactly.
He's busy. He's not playing. So yeah, you have a roster spot that was there last year that you're not using. The question is Taysom Hill. Is how much do you use Taysom Hill as a tight end? What does this new offense kind of look like for the tight end position in ways that it didn't with Pete Carmichael and Sean Payton? Like those are questions you have to answer. And I think, one of the things that we hadn't talked about is like, I think some of these draft picks this year are going to be new prototype picks that Clint Kubiak feels like he needs to run his offense the way he wants to run his offense. So like for the tight end position specifically, that's where, it's kind of tough to gauge because I don't know what that prototype might specifically be. But if there's one of these tight ends that's available in the 5th round that Clint looks at and says, yes, this is the profile that I think works for us and this offense, then you're probably going to go get him. So I think this year more so than some other years where you are shifting in terms of play style, I think you're going to, the offensive coordinator is going to have a bit more sway. 2 years down the line, if there's still this offense in place, it won't be like that. It will be more of a scouting based thing because you've already made that transition. It's kind of like if you're going from a 4-3 defense to a 3-4 defense, a lot of your draft picks have to be geared toward, okay, this is a guy I need for the 3-4 because the guys we have in here are not 3-4 guys. Or at least not all of them. So I think that's kind of what you're going to be looking at. But that's the draft board.
Right.
It's Taliese Fuanga at number 14. It is Keon Coleman, wide receiver out of Florida State, at number 45. I traded into the third round. I traded a couple fifth rounders. I think I traded a sixth rounder. And then I traded next year's fourth rounder for number 95 overall. And that's where I grabbed Mason Smith, defensive tackle out of LSU. PFF would tell you that's a bit of a reach. I disagree with PFF on that subject. Then at 150, I grabbed Dylan Lobe, running back out of New Hampshire. At my next pick was, I want to say it was at 190. 190, I grabbed Christian Boyd, defensive tackle out of Northern Iowa. So I've restocked the defensive tackle position. And then my final pick was Brevin Spann-Ford, tight end out of Minnesota. A lot of players, a lot of young guys, a lot of positions where you needed the numbers and you got them. You found a guy at tackle to help bridge that gap for however long Ryan Ramczyk plays. You added a body in the wide receiver room that can be kind of that big physical guy. You added a tight end who can be a blocker for you. You added a running back, a young running back who can be kind of a scat back prototype that will help you bridge that gap if you do have to move on from Alvin Kamara or Jamal Williams next year. And I feel good about it.
Overall, obviously, anything past, to me, the first round is obviously a crapshoot just because it's so difficult. But the exercise really is, for me at least, just getting a general feel of like who could be in that possibility range for the Saints or another team.
Yeah, and again, it's like, okay, one of the things that a lot of people might not realize is like you're not just drafting guys because you watch their tape and you like them. You're drafting guys that you scouted and you got a really good look at, and that's why when I see visits, that means something. It's you're not. I think it's a lot rarer than people realize for a team to draft a guy that they did not have a meeting with, like an in-person meeting. That's what the combine's for. That's what the Senior Bowl is for. But these teams value these top 30 visits. Like they don't just throw them around. So that's why, I end up with a guy like Lobby and a guy I've talked about a lot, obviously. But all right, that's it. That's the final mock draft 4.0. There's a post up on WWL, at least there will be by the time this goes live, that you can follow along with or go back and kind of see the picks. We got a draft coming up on Thursday. So this will be the last mock draft, obviously. I'll try to get an episode out based on what Mickey Loomis says Tuesday. He's got a press conference at noon. So if he says anything interesting, I'll give that to you here. But otherwise, we're going to dive all the way in. We have a really good draft show on Thursday that you should check out. We got interviews with Clint Kubiak, Rick Dennison, all these new coaches, or at least most of these new coaches, will be on that show. So you'll hear from Clint for the first time. You can hear his voice, and we'll come back with we'll play a lot of that audio probably on Sunday. We have a recap show on WWL that Steve, myself, and Charlie Long will be on, and we will turn that around for a podcast episode just like we did last year. But otherwise, I think that's it. I think we did it. How you feeling, Steve?
Good. But the crazy part, obviously, when the draft wraps up, and we'll be doing, like you said, our draft recap show, but there'll be people putting out the 2025 mock draft, and you're like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah, I'm not into that.
No part of that. I don't want that either, right?
No, I'm going to start turning around my first roster projection. That's what I'm looking for. I'm way more into that than I am the mock drafts personally. I like the roster projection because I don't know, I'm usually pretty good at it. Like I usually get most of these names right. So we'll see. No, but yeah, that's something I'll probably look to post pretty quickly.
You had both Olave and Penning, right?
Last year or 2 years ago? Yeah. Yeah. I had Brzee last year and Foskey. So
oh, okay. I forgot you had Brzee.
Yeah. By the time we get to the end, it's like, okay, there's like 3 names. Pick one.
Right.
I should start gambling on these. But all right, this is Inside Black and Gold. Thanks everyone for listening. I know it's another long one. And if you got all the way to the end, thank you. Appreciate that. Leave a review, subscribe if you haven't. And otherwise, we'll be back at it in a couple days. Who dat? Go Saints.
Let's go draft, baby.
Busy, y'all. Peace.